Let's talk about what it was like to be a Southern musician in the 1920s in America. The most popular music of the time was blues and gospel, two of the most opposed genres in all of music. Gospel focused on a love of God, the force that makes it good to experience life, while blues focused on sadness and loneliness, the force that makes it horrid to experience life. It makes sense that these were the two genres that defined the emancipated South, showing two different ways of dealing with a life that was often filled with poverty, racism, and depression. Since these musicians often had so little and were berated with problems such as illiteracy, bad physical and mental disabilities, and living in places so isolated from the rest of the world, it seemed like a lot of these musicians and songwriters would go unheard, only being remembered by the people that surrounded them. And that would have been a shame, because these musicians were virtuosos at their instruments. Some of the most technically proficient players on the zither, the harmonica, and the guitar were found in the South. Thankfully, these musicians did not spend all their careers in obscurity. Record labels from up north were aware of this sound, one made by people who were completely passionate and devoted to music. These talent agencies would leave notes around town for auditions. If the agent liked the music they heard, then the musician could get a chance to record some singles. The musician would go to the studio, often hundreds of miles away, and would have their song pressed to a 78. The musicians got a cut of the sale from the single, the label got a cut, and if the music sold enough, then the musician could come back and record some more. Now, this might sound like a good deal, but it's important to remember that for most of these agents, they were just looking at turning a profit. They took an Ed Eisner approach to art, one that views money as the central focus and achievements in artistic expression as a byproduct of profit. There were musicians that got popular and managed to sell a lot of music, but it didn't always end in fame or recognition. Most of the black blues musicians from the early 20th century have maybe one photo of them, and will often have that photo mixed up with other blues musicians. If you Google Blind Willie Johnson, one of the most respected blues players of all time, the first picture will be of Blind Willie Johnson, but the second will be of Blind Willie McTell. Johnson's song Dark Was the Night, Cold Was the Ground is on the Voyager Golden Record. It was a song chosen to represent humanity. It will be one of the messages that we will give to extraterrestrial life if it's out there, and we only have one picture of the man. Robert Johnson, a man who is widely regarded as being one of the best guitar players to have ever lived, and the man that represents the blues for many people, has 3 pictures of him. This is one of the most respected musicians of all time, and he only has 3 photos. Not every blues artist was this obscure, however. Some blues artists, like Skip James and Mississippi John Hurt, have not just multiple photos of them, but live footage of them performing. But so many are just lost, only keeping themselves in the world through their music. It's tragic in a romantic way. I think there is a kind of wish that some artists have. The wish is that you are only remembered for the art that you have made. Your personality, your life, your story, all of that fades away. All that is left is the thing that you were most passionate about bringing into the world. You let the music tell your life and your person. You escape bibliographies and you just let people sit with your sound. Of course, these musicians are too important and fascinating to stay hidden forever, and the mystery of these artists is too much to not obsess over. And the most mysterious, or at least most fascinating to me, musician of this time was Washington Phillips. Washington Phillips is a haunting musician, surrounded by mystery, confusion, and love. He fits the narrative that I described earlier. Only 2 known photos of him exist. He has a series of singles that span over 2 years, and no one really knows who he is. But he is responsible for some of the most beautiful music ever recorded. Here are some of the things we do know about him, however. Phillips was the son of emancipated slaves Tim and Nancy Phillips, born on the 11th of January, 1880 in Texas. Like most children of emancipated slaves in the South, life was rough for him, but it was a life surrounded by church and the musical scene that it bred. Phillips played music in both Pentecostal and Methodist churches, but became a Baptist later in life, still keeping music and the Lord close to him. He seemed to be an all-around character, keeping children entertained by eating fish and selling fruit and other oddities whilst trying his hardest to be a preacher. He lived a quiet life, just being a preacher and a kind soul, playing music in church, and honing his skills and creating this gorgeous music. Eventually, producer Frank Walker got into contact with Phillips through recommendation of Blind Lemon Jefferson, a legendary blues guitarist himself, but also someone who played with Phillips in the past. After getting into Contact, Phillips was able to record some 78s in Columbia while he was in his late 40s. He was doing fairly well at the time. The singles were fairly profitable. He recorded 18 songs for the label, 2 of which are thought to be lost. But then the Great Depression hit, and Phillips faded back into the farmer's life when no one was buying gospel anymore. He rarely talked about his music career after it happened. He just went on praising God and living. His life was quiet in his 50s and 60s up until the 20th of September 1954, where he fell down a flight of stairs and died of head injuries. He was 77 years old when he passed. His own obituary named him incorrectly, calling him Wash Willingtons, and it did not even mention the music he made, characterizing him instead with the wagon that he drove. He was buried in an unmarked grave in the colored section of Cotton Gin Cemetery in the countryside of Teague, Texas. We only know this much information about Phillips thanks to interviewing people that knew him when he was alive, and records of censuses and marriage certificates and stuff like that. Without that, we would have no clue who Phillips was, because no one really cared about him at the time. It's just this music that was able to survive and keep interest in this man long after he died. The mystery of Washington Phillips comes from so many different places. One of the biggest has to do with what instrument Phillips is even playing. One of the few pictures that we have of Phillips shows him sitting with 2 instruments. Now, without Googling or looking anything up, what are these? Zithers? Like a weird, kinda like piano thing? A bootleg guitar? Well, apparently the instruments are called manzarines. A manzarine is basically a box with violin strings over it that is then strummed like a guitar. Allegedly, Phillips had to construct these boxes before recording songs, and they were an instrument so unusual that only he could play them. The manzarine is essential to Phillips' sound, and it is the thing that separates him from everyone else. Phillips is not just posing with 2 manzarines just to show his collection. He's posing with 2 because they are meant to be played at the same time, one manzarine playing melodically and the other comping. When you listen to this album with that in mind, you realize that Phillips is playing out of his mind. A manzarine might sound like an overly simple instrument, but it can get a wide range of sounds and can accompany Phillips in a variety of ways. Songs like Denomination Blues have the manzarine sounding like an odd music box, while other songs, like I've Got the Key to the Kingdom, have it take on more of a guitar sound. But to reduce the manzarine to other instruments would not do it justice. The sounds that Phillips gets out of that instrument are otherworldly. It is a sound that is so difficult to explain. You can use words like dreamy or ethereal or psychedelic, but none of them will do it justice. Otherworldly is the word I personally choose because it doesn't sound like anything I, or most musicologists or music historians for that matter, have ever heard. It's difficult to describe. But I think trying to describe the music that Phillips makes is missing the point. Adjectives and adverbs can only do so much. They can never reach the absolute of just listening to the music. So instead of describing the sound, I will just say that Phillips makes me feel so warm with his music. It's a sound that's constantly uplifting and reassuring, continuously supporting Phillips's voice, letting it sound as beautiful as possible. This actually gets to my favorite thing about Phillips. Phillips has a gorgeous voice, a voice that matches the warmth of his instrumental accompaniment. Phillips's voice is a great tenor, but the thing I love most about it is his delivery. I don't think any singer has sounded more passionate in their music. His preaching comes through perfectly. Anyone that listens instantly connects with his love for God. It's addicting. Even someone that isn't that religious like myself cannot help but sing along to songs like I Am Born to Preach the Gospel. And it's not just mindless singing, mind you, but actually believing the words and holding them close to me. I think another reason I resonate so much with Phillips's words more than other gospel and worship music is not just due to his delivery, but also because Phillips's lyrics are quite, opinionated. The song I Am Born to Preach the Gospel has the lyrics, well, we have a lot of educated preachers that's fixed up in the head and got their hearts unfixed with God and walking around buried to death. The album is filled with jabs from Phillips against preachers who do not do God's name justice, more likely than not born from the amount of times Phillips was rejected from preaching at churches just because he wasn't college educated. These criticisms let us know a lot more about Phillips, who he was, what he preached, and what he respected. His thoughts are not too radical or anything like that. He's just a man who knows what he wants. It makes the listening experience feel much more communal. He really does have that preacher energy, the kind that makes a monologue feel closer to a dialogue, the kind of preaching that feels valuable, like you can take something from it. Phillips's personality shines through the entire album. His love for God and his virtuosic levels of playing come together to create an atmosphere that is unlike anything else I have ever heard. An atmosphere that is able to make me feel warmth and love for God that I haven't felt in a very long time. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I just want to give a quick thanks to Michael Kokorin for writing the linear notes for the Dust to Digital release of Phillips's music. That's an incredible read if you want to understand Phillips a lot better. That is the #1 recommendation that I can give. But make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you really like what I do here, go ahead and support me on Patreon. And yeah, thank you so much. Love you. Bye.